IVM.
Hi, I'm Zarina Poonawala, a life coach, a business mentor, and a motivational speaker. I tackle the challenges that come with varied work cultures, and I try to give out some cheat codes for loving your job in the second season of the Empowering series with me, Zarina. This show will feature live sessions with me and a participant, most likely to be an entrepreneur, a startup founder, an employee, a recruiter, or just about anyone who strives to love their job and looks forward to bringing in a positive shift at their workplace. On today's episode of the Empowering series, I'm in conversation with Devangana Mishra and Sandeep Rai. Devangana is a very compassionate woman and a passionate educator. She is the director of the illustrious Teach for India Foundation, along with Sandeep Rai, who is the Chief of City Operations at Teach for India. He has been instrumental in the growth and reach of Teach for India as a movement in over the last decade, right, Sandeep?
Yes.
So, he's also the author of Grey Sunshine Stories from Teach for India. Well, I'm so glad to have both of you on the show because I think this is one of the most successful education programs that we have found in our country. And it's growing, and I am really happy to have you guys because I think you guys are doing a fantastic job in this sector. It's a tough place to be in, a tough place to grow, and you guys have done a wonderful job so far, and it's growing, so it's illustrious work. So congratulations on that, both of you, Devangana and Sandeep, and welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
So
It's very good to be here.
let's talk about your journeys, maybe individually, on your personal levels. How did Teach for India happen to you, and what exactly were you doing before that? Devangana, would you like to start?
I will start this off. Okay,
Sure.
so in 2008, I was trying to figure out, I was right out of LSR, I was trying to figure out what do I want to do in life.
Right.
Smart kids don't teach, so teaching was never something that my parents wanted me to do.
Sure.
So my father happened to be friends with somebody who headed a school in Delhi called Vasant Valley School. I was exploring what I could do in life, just like kind of figuring out what I'm passionate about.
Right.
I met a young boy called Sahil who was on the spectrum of autism. And for the next 6 months, I couldn't sleep at night. I was like, this is it. What I want to do is I want to cure Sahil of his autism. This is what I want to do. I was 21, I think. So I started to explore what is the best way to cure Sahil of his autism. Figured out that Columbia University has an excellent program in autism and intellectual disabilities. Got really excited about that. Wrote to them back and forth for multiple months without my parents knowing.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's just like this little geeky 20-year-old. And long story short, I got accepted to go study a master's in autism. I stayed on, studied a master's in intellectual disability. They were kind enough to give me a big tuition rebate so I could just stick on for a while. I worked in a lot of self-contained classrooms where kids with autism were making massive gains. Got exposed to Teach for America there also because
That's
I visited
beautiful.
some of the fellows and I was like, I want to be a part of Teach for America. They were like, sorry, you have to be American to do that.
Okay, so that's how you actually decided to get into Teach for India?
No, so I
Okay.
didn't even know I think Teach for India is just taking birth at that time.
Yes, it was in its nascent stages.
Yeah. And at that point, I kind of realized after my work in self-contained classrooms with children with autism that these kids shouldn't be in self-contained classrooms. They
True.
should be in like bigger spaces, spend some time working in hospitals also as a behavior therapist. But I was just like, I need to get these kids with autism into classrooms where there are neurotypical kids. Moved to Indonesia to this excellent school called Jakarta International School where I brought in inclusive classrooms. So spent around 4 years, and it gives me goosebumps every time I talk about this, but spent 4 years actually creating classrooms where there were neurotypical kids and neurodiverse kids.
Right.
And the gains that we saw in both kinds of kids was exponential compared to other grades and other classrooms.
Sure.
Also spent a lot of time there kind of trying to think about mindfulness and meditation and self-awareness and all of that. Presented at a lot of places, but the classes that I worked with were 4th grade and 5th grade.
Okay.
I thought about what's going to happen to my kids when they go to high school. And then I stumbled upon a school in Hong Kong called the Harbour School, which basically was like, we're going to change the way high schools look in the world, especially for kids who are neurodiverse with emotional issues and ADHD and autism. Moved to Hong Kong from Indonesia, wrote curriculum, got completely neurodiverse classrooms. I had like 20-year-olds, 18-year-olds, all kinds of kids. Combined Buddhism with psychology, combined music with math, taught entrepreneurship as a subject. So did a lot of cool stuff in that school.
It sounds really cool.
It was amazing. It was amazing. And then my grandmom passed away last year. And I came to India for 3 days, and I'm really close to my family cook and her daughter and all of that. And her daughter Neha, like I've seen her be born, and today she is 8. And we're sitting in this puja, and everyone's praying, crying because my grandmom's passed away. And all I can hear is Neha doing subtraction in the background. And it was completely wrong. And her mother is doing it wrong. And we sent her to the best school in Jaipur. And it was a mess what was happening in the background. And I was just so distracted. I was like, what should I be paying attention to? Flew back to Hong Kong, wrote to Sandeep on LinkedIn. I was like, Sandeep, so I'm coming to India because I know Teach for India is doing this really cool stuff, and I need every Neha to be educated in India because that's what I'm passionate about. I just think education is the way to change. So harass Sandeep and Shaheen over multiple emails and texts. I'm like, so I'm coming in 3 months. I'll quit my job. Let's figure this out. And came to Teach for India to bring in the best people to become fellows for 2 years. So that's kind of my story, as short as I could make it.
Quite a journey, I have to say.
Quite a journey.
Yeah, you've been like all over the world.
Yeah.
Pursuing your passion, trying to figure things out, and finally, getting closer to your goals and your dreams. That's wonderful.
Yeah, exciting.
Yeah, it is quite exciting. And Sandeep, what about you?
Yeah, I still remember the Vangan actually reaching out multiple times and continuing to follow up. And I think it was something that was like, she's going to be very good for recruitment. That's the type of person that you want. And so...
Yeah, the one who's really going to the
go-getter.
Sit on top of things, yes.
So I was born and raised in the U.S. My parents actually immigrated to the U.S. in the late 60s, early 70s. And growing up, I thought I would be anything and everything but a teacher.
Right.
And I was actually really convinced that I was going to go into medicine.
All right.
And that had basically been drilled into me from the time that I was a little kid. And when I say drilled into me, I mean, my sister, who's a doctor actually, and is much older than me, actually took me to a morgue when I was about 4 years old.
To a morgue?
To a morgue.
Okay.
Because she was like, you know what, you need to learn about the human organs. You need to get exposed to this stuff early. And so I have this very vivid imagination and memory from being 4 years old and walking into this morgue and, and having this crazy experience with these cadavers and running out screaming and so that was basically ingrained.
I can imagine something like that happening.
Yes. That was ingrained from a very young age. And so, I was reading medical school books as I was growing up. I was spending my weekends shadowing surgeries. I was doing research when I was a teenager, and everything was pointing to actually doing a career in science and in medicine. And, and so I'm in college, and I'm a few months away from going to medical school, and I have this massive change of heart. And I think it was this realization that I was doing it for all of the wrong reasons. It was this realization that I was going into medicine first and foremost because of the financial security that it would provide.
Right.
And second, because maybe it would give me an opportunity to leverage something that I was good at. And then third is because maybe it would give me a chance to do something good for people. And when I realized how clear that order was, I realized that I was doing it for all the wrong reasons and that I was likely to go down a path that I was going to regret. And so, kind of on a whim, actually, I ended up applying to a program called Teach for America.
All right.
Which is our equivalent in the U.S. And I ended up teaching 7th and 8th grade science in Washington, D.C. for 2 years. And I initially went in, I thought, I'm going to do this for 2 years. I'm going to have a chance to really be able to discover a little bit more about myself, do something good. And in the process, put this medical school decision on deferral for 2 years.
All right.
And so I went into this very much thinking 2 years, I'm in, I'm out. And ended up teaching 7th and 8th grade science in a school that was in really rough condition. A school that actually got shut down when I left.
Okay.
There were levels of violence at this school that were unheard of. It was actually rated one of the most violent schools in the District of Columbia. It was rated one of the lowest performing schools. I think it was the bottom 3 most performing schools in the District of Columbia. And the classroom that I taught in, I had 120 eighth grade boys and girls divided up into several sections. But the classrooms that I taught in, I mean, my kids came with challenges that were just tough. They would come in exposed to levels of gang violence. They would come in, exposed to levels of drugs and poverty and all the things that you can imagine that go with poverty. And I think what those 2 years did is they showed me a few things that honestly form the reason why I've been doing this work 13, 14 years later. And one is that we are dealing with levels of inequity and oppression that are so incredibly real. And they are so incredibly challenging. The fact that my kids chose to wake up every morning and come to school was a feat in and of itself. The fact that they then chose to go on to figure out, to decide to learn was another feat. But they also taught me that this is solvable. My kids achieved things during those 2 years that surpassed the expectations of every single adult in that building. And when I walked out of those 2 years, I think I was holding on to those 2 beliefs. One is I was walking out realizing that I had seen way too much to walk away. But 2, I was basically walking out realizing that actually if you put leadership and if you put the right people, this is something that is solvable. And kind of on a whim again, I ended up jumping on a plane a few months after that and flying to India.
Okay.
And at that point, Teach for India was just an idea. It was a blueprint. And I ended up connecting with Shaheen early on, who was still leading the Akanksha Foundation, the organization she led before this. She was like, we need to basically figure out how to get this off the ground. So I came here thinking I would be here again for a year or 2 to come help us get off the ground. Ended up designing a lot of our programs at the time. And then 11 years later, I'm still here.
That's beautiful.
And so basically over the past 11 years, I've done a number of different roles with us to try to get us going, from leading one of our sites to working in several capacities.
Wow. Both of you have such fascinating journeys.
There's this magic to belief, right?
There is, which I find slightly diminishing in today's world, the belief that you're talking about. But this is amazing. So both of you have a connection that comes from the Columbia University and teaching at a Columbia school and coming from the States. You've studied there, right, Devangana?
Yeah.
And you've literally gone, you're raised
and
there and studied, of course.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. So does that help to, having something common or a common background in a variety of ways, does that help to kind of connect on a mental wavelength? Or do you have maybe ideas that kind of bind you together? Or is there a quicker synergy in comparison, considering that you guys come from similar or let's say, closer backgrounds?
Like, I'll just talk about my experience of getting a job at Teach for India. I've never seen something as complex, as deep as what they do at Teach for India. And I simply think it is because we want that mental synergy, that fit, that drive to create change, believing in things, being relentless. That's what they look for. And that's why it's not a one-round interview with a resume process. It's like a good 8-week process. Because I think everyone, not just Sandeep and me, everyone who works here. The other day I was talking to a friend who said, there's another level of human, right, that Teach for India hires for. It's like our own little world that's just driving on belief every single day. So I think Sandeep and I definitely have that, but everybody else who is a part of this organization boasts of that.
Yeah, very much so. I think that we have a tremendous amount of diversity that we're really proud of. But I think, as Devangana mentioned, like there's a linkage between people that's a level of drive. And it's a commitment to figuring out how to make this country a better place for the next generation. And I want to pick up on something that you said, if that's okay, and just expand on it, right? You mentioned that there's this level of diminishing belief, and I just think that couldn't be more true. And when you look across the country, like you can logically see why.
Absolutely.
Right? And you look at some of the statistics that just stare us in the face every single day, right? We're living in a country where 76% of kids are destined to drop out before they get the 10th standard. A country where less than 10% make it to college.
Right.
A country where 53% of fifth grade kids today can't even read a grade 2 text. And those are numbers that are on average. When you look at those numbers through the lens of low-income kids, they get even worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
Those numbers play out in every scenario that we see when we walk outside of our front doorstep. They play out in the kids that we see on the road. They play out, in what's taking place down the street in the school. And so the fact that we have a country that is rooted in diminishing belief is actually quite logical.
Yes.
When you think about those statistics.
Yes.
Right? And what we at Teach for India believe in, what I've grown to believe over time a lot is that, we've got to figure out how to change that.
Absolutely.
And the only way that you change statistics that are as daunting as that is if you start by changing how people believe and what they believe. And that requires that you figure out how to change mindsets. That requires basically figuring out how to get people to move from, I actually don't think this is solvable. There's too much wrong, to wait a minute. I'm seeing that it's solvable. Let's talk about how we make this happen.
Right.
And for us at Teach for India, it's a lot about how do you change the conversation? How do you change the conversation from one to, I'm not sure if this is going to be solvable, to, let's talk about what we need to do to figure out how to get this applicable for all of India's kids.
True.
Yeah.
That is quite deep. And that is true because when you're meeting people, there's this indifference when you kind of come across people. So until and unless it doesn't affect you, you don't want to do anything about it. So, you kind of see that happening more and more, considering that there are more people in the world. People are getting busier with their lives. And they obviously, something that you didn't do in your earlier days was choose your financial security over something that you found satisfying or contentment in. That's something a lot of people don't opt for. And you have to bring them to think in that direction and probably help them to realize that there is more. There's so much more that one can actually do. And, revolution in any way comes from one person. It's just one person who can, you just require one mind, one human being to create a revolution. So I think Teach for India with so many people is on its journey to a revolutionary change in the country, which is fantastic.
So what's interesting is thinking about belief, thinking about change, thinking about consciousness. I really think that at the end of the day, our Gen Z, we're confusing movement for change, right?
Right.
We think that reposting, retweeting an angry tweet is leading to change, but actually what it's doing is it's creating movement.
Right.
So I think it's easy to go back and sit with yourself and feel like I did my job of doing something for the nation, where actually you're living in this delusion. There's this philosopher, Herbert Marcuse, who talks a lot about you need a change of consciousness as a society to actually see progress and see change.
That's true.
And I think that's the dire need of our country right now, because when we see these jarring statistics, around 76% people of our country's youth are not making it to college, right? Or 50% of India is going to require reskilling to actually fit into the world of 2025. These are numbers that we see, and then what we do is we're like, oh, we should do something, because Gen Z is conscious. They do want to do something, but it's easy. It's like an easy fallacy of I'm doing something by posting something on Instagram, which is where I think Teach for India steps in, and we're like, we will give you don't have to devote your entire life to doing this, but at least try it out and see where this takes you, because it might create a belief that could lead to bigger changes.
So
in the
how do
world.
you think the newer generation, like you said, Gen Z, how do they respond to coming in as fellows for something like Teach for India? What's the response that you get?
It's interesting. So I spend most of my time actually talking to college students, talking to people who are interested in doing this. I think there are two levels of problems going on right now. It's almost like when you go to buy a cereal in the United States of America, there's an aisle of all kinds of cereals that you can buy.
Right.
And I feel like today, for a final year student, for a 23-year-old, there's 100 options of how they think they can create change. If they have a social conscience, I'm talking about that group of people. So why do this 2-year fellowship where I can actually work at a McKinsey in a CSR and feel like I'm doing something? So that's one level of people who are socially conscious and the decisions that they make. The second is, I think we're getting woke as Gen Z, but we're still stuck in this autopilot safety net space where we think when we're doing something for the society, it's a gap year.
Yeah.
Which means, like, how do we break them out of this autopilot of safe job, master's program, all of these things? So a lot of my conversations are around, like, you don't have to treat this as charity or as something that you're going to do for 2 years and be on your autopilot of masters and getting a safe job and earning the money. Like, but there are also a lot of people, we get thousands and thousands of registrations month on month, year on year. But I think the way to change is through excellent teaching, and that's why we're so selective about our fellowship. We only take about 7 to 8% of the people who apply to us, and it's simply because the way to change is going to be through excellent teaching.
Excellent teaching. So, when you're talking about something like excellent teaching and we're discussing, you're right, they do have a conscience, and they also at the same time have the stress or the pressures rather of performing or using that safety net. So I work closely with a lot of startups and, new age leaders and entrepreneurs. And I realize that there is always a conflict of interest within their minds, whether they're picking the right path for themselves as compared to, is it financially viable for me? And maybe that's one of the reasons why, because the Gen Z parents come from a generation which believes in security. And then they come from a generation which believes in taking risks. Right. So they're kind of torn apart with the whole ideation and where it takes you. And there's also a lot of comparison in terms of what you're choosing. Because there's so much out there to study. So much out there to do, right?
Yeah.
So what's your take on that, Sandeep?
I'll say what gives me hope.
Yes, that's interesting.
Over the last 11 years, we have had more than 110,000 people apply for this fellowship.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Right? And when I look at that number, like, what that number tells me is that we have a lot of young people who really want change.
Yes, they do.
Right? Like, that is a number that just gives me an immense amount of hope. And when you look across society, you realize that we're stuck in this rat race, right? And it's this rat race that's basically rooted in, how do I get 7% ahead of the next person?
Right.
So what's the additional 3 steps that I can take, and what's going to get me to, a larger corner office or a larger cubicle? And it's this rat race that's rooted in this large illusion. And the constraints that go with that and the demands that go with that are still very true, and when I look at that, like, I think the fact that we've had 110,000 people over the last 11 years that have said, I want to step out of that rat race. Like, I realize that there is something larger that is worth fighting for.
Absolutely.
And yes, that's going to be uncomfortable. And yes, it's going to challenge, financial constraints and all of the things that society has told me that I need is really hopeful.
That is.
I don't think that those financial constraints go away.
Oh, yes.
I don't think that pressures from society go away. I mean, the reaction that I got from my parents when I decided to do this work was, you are crazy.
Right.
And I don't think that goes away. I'll tell you, though, what I hear from people consistently that complete the fellowship and that spend 2 years. I think some of the things that I hear are, I have learned much more than I have given over these last 2 years. Some of the things that I hear are, this was one of the most challenging things I have ever done. Some of the things that I hear are, I have formed connections with kids that surpass any connection I've ever formed in my entire life. Some of the things that I hear are, I have just been put into a low-income environment that is resource-constrained, and I have grown in ways that I don't think I could have ever imagined. I am more patient. I am more resilient. I have skills that I would have never gained anywhere else. Some of the things that I hear are, I have gotten the opportunity to have an impact and to change kids' lives that I would have never gotten running the rat race. And when I look beyond that, like, what I hear that I have grown skills and competencies that I just would have never gained otherwise. And and think about the fact that, you know, you take a young person and you put them in a classroom that is resource constrained. Kids are coming from levels of poverty and levels of violence that are unheard of. Kids are coming facing some of the statistics that I just talked about a few minutes ago. And your job during these 2 years is not just to be a warm body in that classroom. Your job is to transform the lives of those kids.
Absolutely.
And your job is to reach goals and to basically set out to accomplish a vision that most people in India would actually tell you is not achievable. Think about the type of growth that that's going to elicit. And now compare that to your average corner office job. Right? And I think that's why we have people that are saying those things at the end of the 2 years. That's why we have people that are saying, I've grown in ways that are just unimaginable, because you're trying to achieve things that are, by most standards, unachievable.
Sure. Yeah. That's actually wonderful to be able to come out with that kind of an experience, and that you evolve as a person, and to give fellows who come in probably for a 2-year experience, you know, a stint rather, just trying something out, when you give them an opportunity and a platform to experience how they can evolve as a human being, I guess that's the best. I mean, there's no other takeaway from it. That's the best thing. The kind of questions or the kind of responses you get as to what they've achieved, that's beautiful. Yeah. So you've probably had your share of fair share of challenges when it comes to making sure that Teach for India, the recruitment aspect or the entire impact, it's working, and it's working in all possible ways, all dynamics, right? So do you want to share maybe a story or two of something challenging that you may have faced?
Yeah, a lot. And I think all of those challenges are probably rooted in the challenges that you face when you're really close to poverty and really close to inequity.
Sure.
I would say those have been the biggest ones, right? Like when you're working in communities that are facing levels of inequity that surpass what most people think is imaginable. Right. You're bound to face challenges, and I'll give you a story of just to illustrate that. And this was a child that I spent some time with as I was writing this book. And her name was Malini, right? And she's actually from Govandi, which is not too far away from here. And I was interviewing kids, and everybody kept telling me, you have to talk to this child, Malini, and you have to talk to this child, Malini. And when you start talking to her, you realize like why people said this. She just has this smile that just lights up the room. Right. And she's got this sense of warmth that is just effusive. And so she's got a way to be disarming. And so in the first few minutes, like, you're just comfortable. And, you know, we're sitting there, she's talking to me about, you know, how much she loves Finding Nemo and like the books that she likes to read. And at the same time, though, when you start talking to her, you realize that actually she is many years behind where she needs to be. And this is a 15-year-old child, right? And so my curiosity is running, and I'm trying to figure out, you know, got this child that has so much to offer, but she's so far behind. And when I say she's far behind, you could tell by like, you know, her student work that she's showing me. You can tell by the way that she's speaking about things. You can tell by like even what her teachers are saying. And so a few minutes into the conversation, she's like, hey, do you want to come home and meet my mom? And so I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. And so we start walking through the community of Govandi. And to give you a sense of Govandi, Govandi is one of Bombay's largest slums. Yes. Right? You have an average life expectancy in Govandi that is 39 years of age compared to the rest of Bombay that is 67 years of age. You have an apothecary, a chemist, for 1 in every 10,000 residents, whereas the rest of Bombay, you have an apothecary for 1 in every 1,000 residents. You have levels of disease, of tuberculosis, of infectious diseases that parallel only what you would find in sub-Saharan Africa. You have levels of poverty that parallel only what you would find in sub-Saharan Africa. Study after study have been done on this community, right, to try to understand it. And the way that the community is structured is it basically sits right next to this landfill called the Deonar landfill.
Right.
And this landfill is massive. It's actually where most of the trash from Mumbai gets collected and dumped every day. And so you have this community, which has hundreds of thousands of residents, and it's sitting next to this giant landfill where all of the city's trash gets dumped. And so she and I are walking through this community, right? And the way that the community is structured is that the closer you get to the landfill, the cheaper the rent is.
Right.
And so you can end up living anywhere between 1.5 kilometers away from the landfill, be paying a few thousand rupees a month, and you can be living right next to the landfill and be paying a couple of hundred rupees a month. And Mehek's house is actually about 200 meters away from this landfill. And it's this tin shed house, and I'll never forget walking into this house. This is a tin shed house, and in the walls you've got pieces of plastic and pieces of trash to try to keep the rain out. And the monsoon season has actually just passed, and we go in, and I meet her mom. And her mom cuts cardboard boxes for a living. And she's, been gracious enough to take off a half an hour from work to come and talk to me. And her father isn't there. Her father's actually a rag picker in the landfill.
Okay.
And so we're talking and we're chatting for a few minutes, and it takes her a few minutes to get comfortable with me. But eventually she looks at me and she says, these Teach for India fellows, they've been teaching my child for several years. And over the past year or two, they keep coming up to me and they keep saying, Malini's going to go to college. Malini's going to go to college. And Malini's in the 10th standard. And they're saying, she's going to go to college next year. She's going to go to college next year. And I'm really, and I'm not sure what to think about that.
Right. And
she says, on the one hand, I'm wanting to believe them. But on the other hand, I'm saying there's actually no way that Malini could go to college. And she says, you have to understand where my disbelief comes from.
Right.
And she says, I know that you're sitting in my house and you're probably judging my place right now. And she says, but understand that we are lucky to even be in this house. Understand that what I've been through over these past 2 decades would make you think that it is a privilege to be in this house. And she pauses for a second and she looks down and she looks back up at me and she says, if you would have understood what we've been through over these past 2 decades, you would understand that the life that we have right now, it is a privilege. And so when these people are coming to me and they're saying college, 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 yes, I want to believe them. But you have to understand that every single morning I wake up and I do one thing. I pray for a blessing. And she says, that's the only thing that's actually going to get us through this day. And I walked out of that house that day, and I walked out of that house thinking that, oppression is so real, right? And it's the only thing that accounts for why Malini is where she is. It is decade after decade of oppression. And so when I think about the challenges, I could tell you many. But the biggest challenge is the challenges that we face whenever you are up close to oppression, to poverty, and to inequity. And those are the challenges that keep us up at night. Those are the challenges that drive a lot of what we do.
It's quite heartbreaking, when you have to... But it takes you closer to reality, and it also makes you want to work harder, maybe, right? What about you, Devangana?
This is really close to my heart, so I get a little overwhelmed when I talk about this stuff. But so this has been a really new role for me, being outside of a classroom. For the last 11 years, I've always made a choice to stay humble, to hold a mirror in front of my face. I had to always be in a classroom. It was like my sounding board.
Right.
And I think for the last 10 years, I never zoomed out. I never thought about I'm becoming a leader or I'm doing anything bigger than doing what I'm doing in the classroom and doing what I'm doing with teachers and with curriculum. The challenges are multitude, right? Like because I was out for 2 weeks, I've had kids commit suicide. I've had kids who just needed to smell my hand every day because that's their autistic brain required that sensory stimulation. But in my last year, right before I moved to India, I had a young boy called Thomas Chow. He was at the Harbour School. Genius, absolute genius on the spectrum of autism. He was thrown out of every classroom because his behaviors just would not let him sit in a classroom with 30 other kids. So his brother used to go to Hong Kong International School. He wasn't allowed there. He was at the Harbour School. Every time I'd walk into that classroom, he would be banging his head against the wall, and he had an aide who would just be there to hold him. And I was like, okay, I'm going to bring him into my classroom. We'll see what we can do. And today, when I'm not in that classroom, I see what that journey changed in him. But by the end of 1 year of Thomas Chow, who was in 10th grade, and his mom said, all he will need is a lifelong aid. Just the power of belief and what that holds is transformational. By the end of that 1 year, he went with me for a day-long Buddhist meditation camp, which meant we had to sit for 8 hours and meditate. That boy sat alongside my class of 26 and he meditated, and he kept looking at me and raising his hand, and I'm like, nope, we've got this, Thomas. We're going to be here, right? So that's one side of belief that I hold, which is so close that I get goosebumps and I get teary every time I talk about this. He just sent me his piano recital at his graduation video, and I was just like, I can't watch this. I'm going to need to prep myself to be able to watch this, right? And then on the other hand, today I'm in a role where I'm trying to get the best people of our country to come and become fellows, and I see so much potential in so many people, and I'm like, you're going to be the best fellow you can be. And then 2 days before they're going to fill the application, they're like, actually, you know what? I just got an offer from McKinsey also, and I'm going to take that. And I know the power that person has to change lives. And I'm like, I was this close to actually this person coming and transforming a Malini, transforming a Thomas, transforming a child. And I just lost this chance. So every single day, my heart breaks multiple times, but then every single day, I also find a lot of magic, a lot of hope. I meet amazing people who I know are going to be the future change of this country. So it's this juxtaposition that we live with every day. And I think that's the magic of Teach for India.
I think that absolutely is. On that note, let's take a short break.
Let's do that.
Because this has been a very overwhelming segment, and I am very speechless currently. So let's just take a short break, and we'll see you on the other side of the break.
Yep.
Hey everybody, welcome to another amazing week on the IVM Podcast Network. You know what? Not just an amazing week. This is going to be an amazing year. We're looking forward to all the stuff that we're going to bring you in 2020. Please remember to fill out our survey, ivmpodcast.com/survey. That's going to really help us know what you guys want from us from 2020 as well, right? I mean, we'd really like to hear from you, so please do fill out that survey. It would be very helpful. Also, would like to thank our sponsors on the network this week. We have Intel, Cambly, and Storytel. Also, if you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. It's a week of milestones. We have a couple of milestones this week. Geek Fruit released the 300th episode this week. What a journey it's been. Join Tejas and Dinkar as they celebrate this milestone by talking about HBO's new hit show, Watchmen. Actually, surprisingly, at this point, Geek Fruit is the second oldest show on our network, so it's definitely a show if you haven't checked out, please do check out. Another milestone that we have is it's the 50th episode of our Kannada show, Thale Harate. So definitely do check that stuff out. And as for the rest of our regular programming, on Cyrus Says this week, Cyrus talks to actor Neil Bhopalam. On IVM Likes, Abbas Alika, Ritika, and Madhuri give their weekly recommendations, discuss their favorite short stories, and talk about our new storytelling show, Tapri Tales. On Golgappa, Trupti is joined by Nikhil Mahajan, a director who carved a niche in the industry through his film Pune 52. He elaborates on the craft of storytelling and what goes into making films for a living. On KBCD, Farhad and Sunetro talk about their experiences of having lived in different cities. They share how different cities have had an impact on their queer identity. On Litnama, Lakshmi talks to Sonia Thomas about her work at BuzzFeed, the meme culture, internet as a space for women, TikTok videos, and digital literary trends. On Tapri Tales, Mallory tells the story of a mother who tries to understand YouTube trends and garners a dream of having her own YouTube channel. And with that, let's get on with your show.
So welcome back after the break, and we're still in conversation with Devangana and Sandeep from Teach for India. We've had a extremely vigorating and, eye-opener of a conversation here. Also slightly heartbreaking, but looking at you guys, there's hope. And I love the fact that I can see so much hope in this room, and I'm feeling very hopeful about it. And I want to join your crusade as well. Pretty sure about that. Yeah. So let's dive into the second segment of this. So Devangana, we were talking about a couple of things before this, and I guess you wanted to...
Yeah, so I'm actually really curious because for the last 10, 11 years, my big focus has been self-awareness and how that's a muscle. That's like, you're always getting a little more self-aware with every new situation every day.
Right.
I actually even kind of for a hobby signed up for a life coach,
NLP.
You did? I did. I never finished it. It was just I'm so curious. I'm let me find out more.
Okay.
But I'd love to hear your journey, how you got into that, what you do with life coaching.
Okay, the journey. So... to be honest, my journey, I kind of sum it up in a nutshell in literally one line, that I didn't choose my profession. My profession chose me because things just worked, Yeah. They just work for you. Like when you guys are talking, it's almost like your profession or, there's a calling. One has a calling and you kind of walk into that direction. The only thing I ever did is I never said no to an opportunity, and I started quite young. So sometimes I think when you come from a privileged or a comfortable background, you take things for granted. I'm lucky to have parents, and especially a father who doesn't like me taking anything for granted. So he kind of was happy to have his daughters, even my younger sister, go out at 16 and start working and do whatever you want, but just get to work, do something with your life. I guess that gives you the opportunity to try different things. Even if you don't have a passion, that's something that I actually wanted to talk about when we spoke about the newer generation and what's not working or the diminishing belief. I guess the fact that there's so much stress on the word passion sometimes, that takes away belief. Because maybe you don't have a passion, but that doesn't mean you're a failure. That doesn't mean you don't have a calling. That doesn't mean you cannot do something which is an accomplishment in your life.
Right.
All you need is a purpose. If you have a purpose, you can figure your passion out eventually. So I can't say I was passionate about what I started doing, but one thing led to another. I worked with CRISIL. I worked with, I studied in Australia, so I worked with a couple of companies there. I was with American Express, and they in fact encouraged me to go through the whole Train the Trainer program. So sometimes people find the potential in you that you don't, and that belief that we're talking about, it comes from other people,
Right.
I guess I had good people on the way, and I've been blessed in that manner. I just kind of never said no to an opportunity, so things worked out.
Yeah.
So yes, and
That's wonderful.
that kind of brings me to the fact that podcasting was something that I imagined doing because when like I said, I studied in Australia. I've never mentioned this on the podcast though, but when I studied in Australia, we had an entire thesis and an assignment which we did only on podcasting. And at that time in India, we had no podcast. So naturally, I was unaware about this whole concept. And I worked on the assignment there. And then I decided, back in India, someday I want to get into podcasting.
Great space, right? I think podcast is such a cool way to spread information because we're always stuck in traffic.
Yes,
and we're
are.
always on our phones. So I just think what a great medium to spread awareness, spread dialogue. Yeah.
And, so that's another, just like you guys are having your bit of a revolution going on. Yeah. This too in itself is a challenging space, getting people to listen to something which is filtered, content driven, very, very crisp and clear. It's hard, but it's getting there. Yeah. So yes, I think just it's okay not to have a passion. It's okay to have a purpose in life. It's okay to just keep going on. So that's how my journey has been. And
I love that.
It's great so far.
Yeah.
So that brings me to another aspect of what Sandeep you have done. You've been on TEDx for a talk, and we talked about your book. Is that out of a space of passion? Is that out of a space of you wanting to just reach out to people and share something that's so close to you?
Yeah. So I wrote this book, I think, more from a recognition that I have come across stories and people over the last 10 years that have moved me to tears in more ways than one. I have simultaneously discovered that we have statistics that we just talked about for a while that underlying the diminished belief is a sense of numbness.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, we've almost become so inundated with these statistics that we're just like,
oh yes,
you hear them, but then you keep going on with your day.
Right.
And I think what this work has taught me is that there are human faces that underlie those statistics. With every single one of those statistics, there are people whose lives and whose futures have been robbed. I don't know how else to put it. And the more I've come across those stories over the last 10 years, the more I've realized that we have to be talking about those stories. We have to figure out how to reawaken India's consciousness.
Yes, we do.
We have to figure out how to reawaken India's soul so that we are talking about the stories that underlie those statistics. Because it is only when we start talking about them do we start to feel the need to be able to change them. And so that was one driving force. And the second is that along with those statistics, I have come across stories of people, thousands of them actually, that have convinced me to my very core that change is possible.
Absolutely.
And just as much as the statistics need to get out there, the stories of people who are driving real change need to be out there. And the book is very much an attempt to be able to do that. It's called Gray Sunshine, and it's rooted in the belief that when you are working with kids from poverty, when you're working with conditions that are as deep and as intense as the ones that we are working for, the truth is that the sun never really shines fully. It is always checkered with grayness. For every amount of progress that we make, there are 10 steps that take us backwards. And for every story of hope that we find another story that is balancing it out. And that is the reality of India. And that is the reality of statistics that are as daunting as these. And Gray Sunshine really encapsulates that. It encapsulates the fact that we have seen progress across this country that is so real over these last 11 years. But it also encapsulates the recognition that we have such a long ways to go.
It does. Yeah. It does. I couldn't agree more. And Devangana, what about you in terms of, getting the recruits, having to deal with certain set of challenges, bringing in people, being able to contagiously pass on the energy or that feeling, that faith that you have within you. How do you see that going forward in the future?
I think moving back to India actually shook me out of what I had been normalizing about India for a really long time.
Right.
Moving here from Hong Kong especially, just suddenly I'm looking at the country with a whole new set of eyes. The other day I was at Nature's Basket and there were all these free samples that I was eating, and I came out and there was a mother and a child who were basically begging for food and they barely had any clothes on. And 12 years ago, my parents would be like, don't open the car window, right? But today, it brought tears to my eyes. I'm like, what is going on with us? Why have we just normalized everything? Why are we not seeing what we need to question, right? Like, why is it that in Bandra I can wear shorts and go to the gym, but a kilometer from here, somebody can't do that? Why are we normalizing these things? How have we become like that? And I think all it will require is how do we keep creating dialogue at every level, because I think that's the first step to change, but that is not change.
No.
And that's what I keep repeating and keep reiterating, that that's a first step. Awareness is a first step, but it is 3% of India right now that is engaged in this dialogue. If we need this to trickle down, it would require movement, it would require steps, it would require us to run. So there's this urgency that I'm always in the midst of, but then there's also this hope, because I know we'll make it happen, right? And I know that change begins slowly, but it catches up. And seeing just Teach for India and where it is, I just think we're going to get where we need to eventually, slowly, gradually, but we will.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So in case if there are people out there amongst our listeners who want to probably connect and attach themselves to something as noble as Teach for India, how should they go about it?
So for people who want to apply to the fellowship, I just think you need to make a choice to think about, there are two ways of getting into life. One is the hard way, but every single day you're going to wake up with purpose, with meaning, with a lot of responsibility.
Sure.
or there's a way where you just put a check mark on your resume and you move on. And I think it's for a 22-year-old to decide what is the way to do it, because what Teach for India offers you is the former way.
Correct.
And my hope is that multiple amazing young Indians think about choosing the former way of doing this. So our last deadline would be in the first week of March, and it's a thorough, long, strenuous but extremely exciting process of going from being interested in the fellowship to actually becoming a fellow, because we're so careful about who we pick as a fellow.
Right.
So I hope many people listening to this podcast actually take that brave step.
That's
and
the
go
1st of
through
March,
this.
You said, right?
It should be the 8th of March, which
so
will
around
be,
March, basically,
which
the
will
first
be our
week.
last deadline.
And how do you get in touch with you? How do we connect with
We
you?
have a website, we are all over. So
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, there are multiple ways of going, but just go to the website. There's an apply page there. Get on, and we'll have somebody who will contact you.
Which is just www.teachforindia.org.
Okay,
Yep,
wonderful.
that's
So
it.
we'll definitely have a couple of our listeners who are completely motivated while listening to both of you.
This is exciting.
I know it is, right? So let me come to, unfortunately, the last segment of our conversation today. And since it's the Empowering series, I'd love to know from both of you, what is it that empowers you?
I think two things, and two things give me an immense amount of hope. And I think keep me going and keep me empowered throughout this. And I mentioned all of the things that I hear people saying that complete this program.
Right.
And I think one of the things that I would add to that list is I am now a part of a growing network of people that is forming a movement.
Right.
We have 3,000 leaders who have completed this fellowship and are doing amazing work across this country. These are people that are starting their own schools. These are people that are working with policy. These are people that are, working within corporates. These are people that are working across, but they are all commonly bound by a commitment to changing this country for the better. And every time I interact with these people, I'm just reminded of how much hope there is. And I think that is one. And I think the second piece that gives me just an immense amount of hope is just seeing the paths that people who have chosen to do this work have traversed just to get here. And I'll leave you with one short story and then pass this over to Devangana. And that's one of our fellows, his name was Ishwar, and he was a son of a farmer, grew up in rural Bangalore, and then after that was the first in his family to actually make it to college.
Oh, wow.
Ended up doing really well in college, ended up getting a job with IBM, where he basically worked and got promoted several times over the course of a decade. And after being there about 7-8 years, started spinning and basically said, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm not sure that, this is not fulfilling the purpose that I wanted. And, his colleagues, his manager basically tried a lot of different things, right? They tried basically saying let's figure out how to switch you onto different teams and a lot of well-intentioned things. And after a few months, he was like, look, this is not you. This is me. I need to figure out how to basically tap into my purpose.
Sure.
And he ended up discovering Teach for India through a few friends' posts that decided to apply, ended up getting selected, ended up getting in, but didn't have any clue what he was getting into, right? Thought that he was basically going to be coming and doing something. He had all of these loans that he had taken out. His father had stopped working.
Okay.
He had basically taken out a loan for his sister's wedding, all sorts of stuff. And he gets to our institute and he realizes how intense of an experience this is going to be. And he jumps on the phone and he calls his dad and he says, Dad, listen, I didn't know how to tell you this before now, but this is an experience that has touched me in ways that I don't know how to explain. I think for the first time in my life, I have found purpose. And he said, but at the same time, I need you to know that if I do this, I'm probably not going to be able to help out like I've been helping out over the past several years.
Of course.
And he was expecting his dad to go flip out, to basically get mad, to get upset. And his dad said, listen, son, I've never heard anything like this from you before. And he said, I'm going to be honest with you, this is going to put a strain on us. But if you've actually found purpose, do it. We'll go back to work. And over the next 2 years, Ishwar actually sent half of his stipend home every single month to his parents, just to basically make sure that he could balance both. Today, he's running an organization that's impacting thousands of kids across the city of Hyderabad.
Wow.
And to this day, he continues to send half of his stipend back. And I tell you that story because it is stories like that that remind me that we have young Indians across this country who just want change.
Yes.
And who want it so badly that they're willing to figure out how to do whatever it takes. They're willing to accept that the laws of the universe will get suspended for them to figure out how to drive change. And I think what I've realized too, that is whenever you want change badly enough, you can drive it. And that more than anything else is what keeps me empowered.
That is beautiful. Wow. What about you, Devangana?
Very kind of on the similar lines of what Sandeep said, but I think for the last 10 years, I thought courage was just going into this classroom and doing what I can do within this classroom because it felt like it was something I could control. I categorically didn't sometimes you just don't let yourself think about the things that you don't want to think about. You don't expose yourself to realities you don't want to be exposed to. And I think my jump from doing this really micro, deep work with small groups of people to actually jumping into this big world of, hang on, let's actually try to do this with India was a really, really big jump. I still process it every single day. But I think my hope lies in two things, right? I think number one, every single day we're seeing report after report, news article after news article saying that nothing is going to change education, change countries other than excellent teaching. When they compare Finland to Singapore, what they're seeing is why Singapore has made the gains they've made in the last 10 years, which Finland hasn't been able to make. It is simply because of what Singapore did with their excellent teaching, right? Which kind of gives me hope that, hang on, you're in these big booths of trying to do more than you thought you would be doing, but you can make that happen. So that gives me a lot of hope. It's kind of exciting. But the second thing is, I spend a lot of time talking to college kids and talking to other people. And I told you about how they've got a lot of options and all of these things. But I think the cool part is every time I'm addressing a group of 100 kids, there are these 30 pairs of eyes that I see that just soften, that are just eager, that are excited. And that's really, really exciting to see because I just feel like those are the 30 people who are going to get out and do something about it. Maybe not join the fellowship, but do something. And knowing that you're part of this big change of consciousness at a larger level is really exciting.
Yes.
So I think that just really keeps me going.
So that's what empowers the both of you.
Yeah.
Excellent. So, well, on that note, I'd like to just, share a little bit of a nugget before we wrap up. So the UNESCO Institute and the Global Education Monitoring Report, right, in 2017, it showed the connection between education and poverty. And to kind of get rid of poverty and to cut it down. If we could educate, or most people, all adults got educated to a certain level, 55% of the world's poverty would be cut down. That's more than half. And that's all I want to tell people out there who are listening to you and who would be interested in education and, the drive for change, is that do not resist change. Just embrace it. Just like you guys have, and that you're making people do. So thank you so much, Devangana and Sandeep, for this.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been so good to be here.
Wonderful, invaluable insights that you've given us. Excellent. Thank you so much. Wonderful.
This was really fun. Thank you.
If you liked this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcast on Twitter and Instagram.
Welcome to Peak Planet, a new podcast where we delve into the fallouts of the growth path that we, and indeed much of the world, has chosen. Sustainable growth is the buzzword. Until we nail that down, we need to ensure that we keep our population healthy and also have the resources for our increasingly urban lifestyles.
I'm Karthik Ganesan, a researcher at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, a Delhi-based policy research institute where for almost a decade we've been trying to explain and change the use, reuse and misuse of our resources. In the first season of Peak Planet, we take up air pollution, public enemy number one and an invisible one at that. Increasingly, the most important risk factor for adverse health outcomes, air pollution has become the most unwanted byproduct for an aggressively growing economy. Over 4 episodes, we find out how prepared our systems are to deal with this crisis. You can catch the entire first season of Peak Planet out now on the IVM Podcasts app or website, or wherever you get your podcast from.
Did I just catch you on your way to work? Or did you end up pulling an all-nighter? Let me guess. You have a packed schedule for the day, the week, and probably the month and the year. That's a lot for your mind to handle, don't you think? This buzzing chaos also brings tons of negative thoughts. Am I right? Try spinning that bottle in a positive direction with me, Chetna, on the Positively Unlimited podcast, every Monday on IBM Podcasts. It's time to change your life one alphabet at a time.